Then there's a question of a really good question. I think this is a quote from me, is it? To be a to be a person is to know at your centre an inviolable and unique personal space. Is it me? It is what gives us our own integrity, a sense of our own reality.
It's a quote from Michael Maine,
Oh, right.
who was Dean of Westminster.
Right, good. And yes, it's a very important thing to say. To be a person is to know at your centre an inviolable and unique, I don't know if I'd use the terminology unique personal space, but it's really getting at something really important. It's what gives us our own integrity and sense of our own reality. It's difficult to call it anything, but unique, personal. I suppose you could say space in the sense of the preciseness of we are that particular point of connection, you might say. Not to be confused with any other. And this is so then the question goes on, this is the concept of I have always lived with and thought of as my, interesting, I've thought of that as my soul or ego, for better or worse. So, interesting use of terminology. There's a tendency these days to use ego for something bad, isn't there? Like pride, but I don't think it necessarily has that connotation. And soul, among Buddhists, isn't very fashionable, but it's got a real resonance to it, doesn't it? Your soul, soul music, souls. So it can be very powerful. I suppose I would tend to call it my true self, being true to myself, my true self. In that sense, I would use that with a bit of weight. What am I truly in myself? What is my true self? Which would be my integrity, my reality, what I truly am, what makes me what I am. So the question is, I'm confused by the notion of no self. Yes, it's odd, isn't it? And the emptiness at the core of my being this implies. So I do say that actually the Buddha didn't teach there's no self. The only context in which he said there's no self is in the context where he said there was no anything, no nirvana, no samsara, like really attacking, grasping at concepts. But other than that, he didn't say there's no self. But he pointed at what we clung to as our self and argued that if you look, you don't find it has the qualities of a self. It's impermanent, unreliable, suffering. That's not what you truly are. That's not anything that you can. That's not what you are. That's something passing and changing and not self. So, but there's a lot of this goes on, saying, there's no self. if that were true, then you... I can't even imagine what it would mean to be true, actually. It's like saying there's no reality to anything. It doesn't even make sense. But when people say no self, what they're referring to is that there's what we cling to as self is not real. So then the question is, does my sense of I and the me experiencing my experiences exist? I think that's not really the question, because I think you know that that's all you know. So we don't know what exist means, but what we do know is that all I know is myself, if you like. That's all I know. The question is, does anything else exist? And how would I know that? How would I know my true self? It's difficult to discuss it even, because normally when we say knowing, we assume the self that knows and talk about then the subject matter we know. But if you're asking about, well, what's the one that's knowing, you can't take it as an object, can you? So if it can be known, and presumably it can since we don't know anything else, it's not known that way. It's not known as something that you can take as an object. And when you look at what you're taking as an object, you're taking the world everywhere, everything, you're taking as, something is knowing this. I'm not going to ask what this is, but whatever those things are, I feel I can know them. But can you? In what sense are you knowing them? Can you know something that's outside of yourself, outside of your mind? How would you get outside of your mind to know something that was outside of it? So, going back to what I said originally, we don't know anything, do we? We've got a lot to explore there, because we must know, because we're the ones asking the questions, aren't we? We're the ones that think we know things. So that's what the path is about. It's examining the nature of, if you like, the nature of knowledge. If I don't know something that's outside of my mind, how do I know anything? It's a very deep question. What you can start to notice, though, is whatever knowledge is, when I grasp at an idea or a concept, perception, that's not the thing itself. And this process, I do know. What the thing itself is, I will never know by that process. Maybe I can know it some other way. But it won't be that way. Maybe that way points to something of a concept. Maybe have a concept of the Buddha, have a concept of space. Some real response that I sensed something, but if I grasp the concept, that's not it. So the interesting thing is to come back to, so how am I operating, and how can I operate in a more genuine and true way, allowing the concepts to point me to something beyond themselves. Don't have to reject the concepts, but to handle them lightly, so they point me to something that I know. If you like, that I know the concepts came from. This is very deep, what I'm saying. But these are deep questions, so what can I do? So it's important not to adopt the view that Buddhism teaches there's no self and I've got to convince myself that there's no self. That's not the path at all. But it's often presented as if it is, I'm afraid. Well, I'll move on.